World leaders have started arriving at Uzbekistan's Samarkand for the Shanghai Cooperation Summit. From China's Xi Jinping, Russia's Vladimir Putin, Iran's Ibrahim Raisi and also Pakistan's Sharif. Now, the summit is being touted as a clear challenge to the Western global influence. Now, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is all set to arrive later in the day today, while the main meeting of the summit is scheduled to be held on Friday. All eyes are going to be on this much-anticipated bilateral meeting between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin later today. Now, for Vladimir Putin, the summit is a chance to show that Russia cannot be isolated. And it's come at a time when the Russian forces are facing some major setbacks in the battlefield in Ukraine. Now, for Xi Jinping, this is an opportunity to shore up his credentials as a global statesman ahead of a pivotal Congress of the ruling Communist Party next month. Now, President Putin is also scheduled to meet with the Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi and also with the Pakistani Prime Minister Sharif later in the day today. And Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is officially scheduled to meet with the Prime Minister of Uzbekistan and with President Putin. Although speculations are rife that there is a possibility of a one-on-one meeting between the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and leaders of both China and Pakistan. The Indian Foreign Ministry has neither confirmed any such meeting so far. All right, now to give us more insight in terms of what's of course expected to happen in Samarkand today and of course tomorrow, we're being joined in by WION's principal diplomatic correspondent Siddhant Sibil, who's joining us live from Samarkand. Also, we have with us Pakistan's Bureau Chief Anas Malik. He's also joining us live from Samarkand. And also to give us how the West is viewing the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit today, we're being joined by Ross Cullen, who's joining us live from Paris at this point of time. Now, Ross, let me start with you on this occasion. Now, this is a summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The leaders of Russia, China, India, Pakistan, Iran are all going to be in attendance. And what is being said is that this crucial summit is being dubbed as providing an alternative vision to the world order. How is the West looking at this present summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization?
Oh, they'll be watching very closely to see particularly this meeting between President Xi Jinping of China, President Vladimir Putin of Russia. That meeting on the sidelines expected to take place very shortly in Uzbekistan. The first trip for the Chinese president outside China since the world's first coronavirus lockdown came into place in February 2020. Just before that, just before the war began, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, Russia and China held that meeting with the expectation that there would be no limits to the partnership between Beijing and Moscow. And so what the West will be watching particularly will be to see if there are any comments, particularly from China and the Chinese delegation around Xi Jinping, to see if there will be any limits at all imposed by Beijing on how far it would go to support Russia in what Moscow describes as its special military operation, the invasion of Ukraine. You mentioned in the introduction there that there have been some gains recently by Ukraine on the battlefield. And so when it comes to the military technical discussions between Putin and Xi, the West will be watching very closely to see what comes out of that meeting.
Absolutely, indeed. That's going to be a crucial aspect of how the West, of course, is going to react to what is likely to come out of this meeting. Now, Siddhant, if I can bring you in on this. The fact is this summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is taking place at a time when Russia has invaded into Ukraine. A furious war is, of course, raging there. And on the home front for China, the tensions in the Taiwan Strait have never been as high as what they've been in the last 4 odd weeks. Now, the question that I want to ask you is, now, looking in terms of how the different equations are playing out between different nations of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and also many nations in the West, what are we to expect, especially when Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin will be meeting for a bilateral today?
Well, Mohammed, first, when the bilateral happens, everyone will be keen to notice the body language between the two leaders. We have seen in the past that whenever anyone has gone to Moscow, it's the size of the table that determines how big the story is, how fruitful perhaps the conversation is, we know there have been European leaders going to Moscow and welcomed by the Russian president with a long table. But coming to Samarkand with its historical background, it provides an ample of opportunity for Russian and the Chinese leader to perhaps repeat the history, because they are keen on an alternative world order, which is being challenged, or which is challenging the West dominated world order. And that is something that the Russians are keen on, the Chinese are keen on, and that is why this camaraderie, this brotherhood between the Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Chinese President Xi Jinping is something that will be closely watched. In fact, the last time they met was in Beijing at the Olympic Games, where the Russian President had visited. Thereafter, we saw the invasion of Ukraine, and this is the first in-person meeting between the two leaders. It will be the camaraderie perhaps that takes the spotlight rather than perhaps the documents, but because it's believed that documents will not perhaps give much more clearer picture of what transpired. But this is a grouping which is dominated by India and by Russia and China, and it has members like India and Pakistan. So largely this provides an ample of opportunity for the Russian president to have number of bilaterals. Today he's having number of bilaterals, 5 to 6 bilaterals, and also on Friday he's going to meet number of world leaders, including the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Absolutely indeed, Siddhant. We'll of course be watching out for the body language and how big the tables are when the leaders of course sit down there for the summit meetings. Now, Anas, if I can bring you in on this, the fact is Pakistan is also playing a very delicate balancing act, because it has got a very good relationship with the United States of America, and it also has a very close relationship with China as well. Now, recently, the Americans decided to upgrade the F-16 fighter jets of the Pakistanis for about $450 million. And now, the Pakistani Prime Minister will be sitting across the table with the leaders of China and Russia. What is Pakistan looking to get out of this summit?
Well, at this point of time, Saleh, the only thing on the agenda is to engage with the new government. We've seen that this visit at the SCO comes in the backdrop of those allegations that by the former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan on the incumbent regime, that they're Western stooges, or they've been installed through a regime change operation. That is what he has been alleging. In an hour, or roughly in an hour and a half from now, we'd be seeing that the Pakistani Prime Minister Sharif will be meeting his Russian counterpart, in fact the Russian President Vladimir Putin, very near to where I am, almost next to where I am. This is where the meeting between President Putin and Prime Minister Sharif is to take place. You've rightly mentioned, it is a clear case of balancing act. Tomorrow he's due to meet President Xi, and what is more important is that just some days later, on the 20th, Sharif is due to dash to the United States to participate in the UNGA. Therefore, Pakistan has to maintain that objective neutrality. They have to maintain that cautious optimism. But at this point of time, it is absolutely imperative for them to engage, because engagement is something that this government has been lacking on, and that is the reason the Prime Minister has himself decided to come here and participate in the summit. Saleh?
Indeed, Anas, that of course is something that we'll be looking for, the kind of delicate balancing act that Islamabad of course is playing at Samarkand. Now, Ross, if I can bring you in on this, ever since the war in Ukraine started, ever since Russia invaded there, the United States and several nations in the West have been saying that the way to try and bring a halt to the Russian aggression in Ukraine is to try and isolate Russia. But looking at how things have panned out, both economically in terms of the sanctions, the way they've been in some ways blunted because of the various ways in which Russia has been able to diplomatically ward them off, and also because of the backing that it has got from China. Now, are we to now assume that the Western sanctions on Russia simply haven't had the effect of isolating Russia as the West would have hoped?
Well, the West has also regularly been picking up the phone to the Kremlin. We know that Olaf Scholz spoke in the last couple of days. The German Chancellor Emmanuel Macron has made many phone calls to Vladimir Putin over the last few months to try to keep the phone lines open to Moscow for that dialogue about how to try to bring the war to a swift conclusion and try to bring peace back to Europe, where there is the war that has been going on since late February, and it's a war that has been on the continent. Therefore, the European Union has been heavily involved. We know how far the West has gone to try to support Ukraine with billions of dollars of investment and assistance and billions of dollars worth of military aid as well into Ukraine to try to help it fight off the Russian invasion. There have been sanctions, the toughest sanctioned regime the European Union, the UK and the US has ever brought in against Russia to try to force it to step down and step away from this invasion, to roll back the tanks and try to leave all of the territory of Ukraine that it has either invaded or so far occupied. Russia says that it wants to continue this operation until it's fulfilled all its ambitions, but there certainly is fulsome backing by the West for Ukraine, and there will be watching to see if there is any mention of Ukraine at any of these bilaterals that Vladimir Putin holds with his counterparts.
Absolutely, indeed. That's something that we'll be watching out very closely as this summit, of course, unfolds through the day and indeed tomorrow. Now, Siddhant, one of the other aspects of also what is unfolding at the SCO is the inclusion of Iran, especially at a time when the West, of course, is trying to negotiate with Iran for a nuclear deal. Now, the inclusion of Iran into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization means that many of the sanctions that the West has now imposed on Iran actually do not have the same effect that they earlier would have. How are we to read into this?
Well, one of the key outcomes of this year's summit is the MOU that the Iranian leadership will sign with the SCO grouping, which will in fact lead to Iran becoming the member. It will officially take the participation or become the member of the grouping during the Indian presidency that begins on Friday evening. But largely this shows that how the grouping is expanding towards Near East. There have been, of course, intentions by the Arab countries as well that they would also like to become member of this grouping. At a certain level, this grouping is already very large in terms of population, in terms of geography, in terms of the economic weight. An addition of Iran adds to the weightage of this grouping, and as it's being said, an alternate dimension to an emerging world order, which is something that is challenging the world order, which is Western dominated. But largely we know that the focus has been on usage of local currencies. Russia has been focusing on that. Iran could be the next country that can be strongly focusing on that, because Iran also faces a lot of Western sanctions. Russia also faces Western sanctions. So they will be keen that when it comes to this grouping, especially intra-grouping meeting or inter-grouping trade, the focus is on usage of local currency for economic benefits of the regional countries.
All right, I think we are completely out of time there. Thank you very much indeed to Siddhant Sibil, to Anas Malik, and also to Ross Cullen for joining us on this broadcast and getting us all those updates. This, of course, is a very crucial summit that is underway in Samarkand. We'll, of course, be tracking all the developments as they happen. Thank you very much indeed to all three of you for joining us. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.